For 70 years, Hydra has been secretly feeding crisis, reaping war. And when history did not cooperate, history was changed.
That's impossible. She'll have stopped you.
Accidents will happen. Hydra created a world so chaotic that humanity is finally ready to sacrifice its freedom to gain its security. Once the purification process is complete, Hydra's new world order will arise.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on December the 7th, 2014. Last week I touched upon the Fabian Society, the so-called left-wing arm of the right-wing Royal Institute for International Affairs, or Council on Foreign Relations, because they literally run every side of every party, every organisation, you name it, whatever. They run it all. They even run countries in conflict and major wars. In fact, they started the wars, if you go through their histories, especially from their personal appointed official historians. They have their own version of history, which is the true one. But it's not the one that's taught in your schools, because their own employees and members write your history books as well. So these are the guys who set up the Fabian Society, the Royal Society, which gives you all what's supposed to be the authorized true science that no one can argue against, including climate change and all the rest of it, for big social control measures really across the whole of the planet. They set up the United Nations, and the United Nations, under all the treaties that they do, this private organization, by the way, the United Nations, a private corporation. And then you find out they implement all the policies that the big boys wanted to implement well over 100 years ago, and using all means possible to con the public into giving all rights and freedoms up to allow themselves to be managed more scientifically and expertly, supposedly. Because you can't decide yourselves how to live, you see. You're too stupid. So you need experts and professionals, intelligent ones, all selected and appointed because they're very politically correct, and they'll have a big paycheck to run your lives for you. That's what it's about. So I touched on the United Nations GIRFEC program for Scotland. They have ones for every country, different names. It's all the same thing, because it's all under the United Nations Treaty on the Rights of the Child, which has nothing to do with the children having rights. It's the right of the big boys to monitor you and run your life from birth to death, and to destroy all the old systems, including the family unit, of course. So you find that the parents end up having no rights at all. I'd just like to add something else onto it tonight that I touched on last week, but not in great depth, and that was to do with the rights of the child to take euthanasia if they require. And like every time they introduce some new part of their big worldwide plan that's worked out in a timetable map type idea, they always pick a country to start things off in, and they used Holland initially to introduce euthanasia, in Switzerland too, and in Holland eventually they knocked it down until children can be euthanized as well, and they also knocked it down so that if you feel depressed, regardless of age, then you could request it as well. So now you'll be very wary of your quacks, your doctors, because they're making a fortune of body parts galore. You wouldn't believe it, actually. I know folk who are in the harvesting business of organ transplants, by the way. And it's incredibly lucrative and getting better all the time. So with getting younger and younger organs for all the big rich so-and-sos at the top, who live an awfully long age, actually. They're given, real medicine and so on, not the stuff that you're getting. And they don't eat the crap that you're fed, by the way. And I had to say that word, it slipped out, because that's what it is. And Your life is shortened while theirs is actually extended. They have medicines which you'll never hear of, actually, which keep them going an awful long time. But they still need organ transplants, because these characters love to booze it up, all their big luncheons and do's that they have worldwide all the time. And they're going through livers like crazy and various things like that. So they like to live because they enjoy life, you see. They have no worries whatsoever. They really enjoy lives because since they own all the tax systems in the world and things like that, they're not worried about getting hammered with taxes. All the things that terrify the rest of you, they don't have any worry at all. So life's awfully good to them, and they really, really enjoy every day. Now, let's get getting back to GIRFEC, getting it right for every child, the United Nations plan for Scotland under the rights of the child. I'll put a PDF up tonight from their own site, by the way, and it says, a call for views by the Scottish Parliament's Health and Sport Committee. I guess they're calling it sports now for suiciding you. On the Assisted Suicide Scotland Bill, because they have them for all countries, actually. They're implementing them gradually. And it says here, together, doesn't it sound wonderful, all these things? Together, Scottish Alliance for Children's Rights is an alliance of children's charities, all these NGOs that work for the big United Nations company, Inc., that works to improve the awareness, understanding. So Orwellian, it's beautiful. As long as they paint it and dress it up and nice flowers and so on, the people swallow this stuff without thinking what it means. Anyway, I mean, literally, they could give you a genocide of a whole nation and do it the same way, and actually they have in the past. This is understanding and implementation of the UN Conventions of the Rights of the Child in Scotland. We've over 260 members ranging from large international and national non-governmental organisations. They're all paid by the front organisations which funnel the cash to them. And these are the big foundations that you know of, like Rockefeller and Ford Carnegie and all the bunch that go along with. There's stacks of them. It says the NGOs through to small volunteer-led after-school clubs. They use everything in your naivety as well. So our activities include collating an annual State of Children's Rights report to set out the progress made to implement the UNCRC in Scotland. We also provide a focal point through which Scottish NGOs report to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. Now, you notice there's no families allowed to voice their opinions here. It's all that the officially recognised and member non-governmental organisations of the United Nations. And it says, the views expressed in the submission are based on the general principle of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and do not necessarily reflect the specific views of each member organisation. They always give themselves a back door in case we ever have a Nuremberg trial one day, which won't happen, unfortunately. But anyway, it says here, together, that lovely name again, welcomes the opportunity to offer views on the Assisted Suicide Scotland Bill, which was introduced to the Scottish Parliament on the 13th November 2013. Remember, I've gone through the history of this. Go into cuttingthroughthematrix.com and go through the archive section. There's thousands of audios there and links galore, where I went through the history of John Stuart Mill, and then the same son that he had, the same name, and the H.G. Wells, who wrote lots of non-fiction books, by the way, for the Fabian Society, and he wanted even to bump off not just the Irish, but the Scottish as well. So here they go. They're going to make sure there's no racials, but that terrible word, racial Scots left, like ethnic Scots. Anyway, it says that the policy memorandum of the bill states that the bill allows people to actively wish to retain control of their lives. So you can retain control of your lives by killing yourself, right? To secure a dignified death at a time of their own choosing, instead of having to endure a poor and declining quality of life. Now, quality of life, as I say, that includes depression, folks, or I'm just a bit fed up this time, I've got the blues, And youngsters often get the blues, especially when there's no future in a society that is kept, by design, fundamentally broke. So quality of life until such a time as they die as a result of their illness or condition, right? The bill dictates that for a person to be granted such control, they must be at least 16 years of age. So it says together, we're all together, we're all going down the tubes together, They're going to bump us all off. Together, we'd like to make the following comments in response to the bill. Firstly, we take no position on assisted suicide, nor on whether children should have a right to assisted suicide. That's again a caveat to, in case there's a Nuremberg trial one day. However, when the issue is being discussed, now so here is their opinion on it, the rights of children should be taken into account, just as they should be when other important matters affecting their health and well-being are being considered. If the proposed bill were to be introduced, together we'd want the committee to consider the impact it could have on the rights of children and young people. Now, in other words, any age group, from babies all the way up. The proposed legislation could impact on children who have parents, carers or siblings with terminal illnesses, or on children and young people who themselves have a terminal illness. Now, you better understand something here with their wording. Under the genetics agenda for eugenicists, if you are below a certain par on whatever scale they design, physically, mentally, whatever, intellectually, that can easily be slipped into terminal illness when they say that you can't support yourself, you can't survive properly, or you're antisocial. It's been proven by previous generations. You've had an uncle or an aunt here that was antisocial. It's in the genes. A burden on society. Anything at all. Or apolitical or anti-political or whatever, or anarchistic or whatever it happens to be, can be put in there, folks. And this is how they do it. Get it on the books and expand it, just like anti-terrorism laws. And it says here, in all decisions affecting children and young people, the views of a child must be given due weight in accordance with their age and maturity. Now, this is the same organization for GIRFEC, Getting It Right for Every Child, that mandates that children, even about 2 years old, must have an assigned government-appointed guardian who will test them for psychology and what they think of things and other people, etc., as they go on down through the years up to the age of 18. And by the way, social work departments, psychiatry, everything's involved in this mental health to make sure that they can catch anything like original thought very early and correct it, you see. And don't believe for a second that it stops at 18, because you see they've got bills on the table to be introduced a few years down the road to expand this ongoing surveillance of the individual and testing of them annually, even psychologically, for the rest of their lives. They've got them on the table right now, just waiting to go in and get signed in the right year and date. They've already published articles from the various psychological associations they have at the World Health Organization about this. And apart from that, they have all your data, your schooling, any problems at school of all kinds, family problems, work records and so on after school. They're all mixed together with the social work departments and agencies and police, you name it, all together. Everyone must be completely profiled and updated in real time as they go through their entire life from birth to death. I talked about this years ago, because I read all their documents a long time ago, you see. Now, getting back to this PDF here, from their own site, the United Nations, and it says here, in all decisions affecting children and young people, the views of a child must be given weight in accordance with their age and maturity. And then it goes on, together recommends that the committee looks at the comparable legislation to learn from other countries' experiences. Together does not endorse any specific legislation introduced elsewhere, rather recommends that the Health and Sports Committees uses international debate and experience to inform its own deliberations. Health and Sports Committee. Well, that child broke his leg on the field there in that game. Euthanize him. Yeah, I'm kidding, folks. Nothing is impossible these days. Nothing. Just give you time and a little bit of brainwashing through all your movies and so on, and you'll go along with it. It says, it's important to note that the children are prone to and suffer terminal illnesses and extreme physical pain, just as adults do. Considering the assisted suicide Scotland bill, the Health and Sports Committee should consider how the bill could better affect the rights enshrined in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. This would be in line with the duty placed on Scottish ministers to keep under consideration and take steps to further the rights of children and young people through the Children and Young People's Scotland Act. There's no mention of parents anywhere here. And it goes on and on and on. And as I've already mentioned it too, and I've read articles years ago on this, on the air, that, as I say, anything, even temporary blues that you go through is considered an illness now, and a lot of the countries have ramped ahead the euthanasia laws. So, I'll put this link up tonight for anybody who's interested. Most won't be interested because I always seem to think that everything doesn't affect them. That's how they're trained. They live in a little bubble, and they believe they're in a wee bubble, actually, and they believe they'll sort of live forever watching movies and munching things and so on, and having fun, and nothing will ever touch them whatsoever. But that's the name of the game. Now, their big thing here is what I mentioned years ago too, and every year since, that you understand whatever they plan 100 years ago, they always work at it, the Fabian style, step by slow step, and condition generations of the public along gradually, through gradualism, into accepting anything that they want. Then they hit you at the right time when they know no one's going to complain, or the few that do and who are aware don't count, you see. Oh, they're counting the ones that do understand because there's very few left with an intact brain. But here's an article here to do with the big boys again. They have nothing to do with running your country. They run it internationally. Every politician you have is international. And they take their orders from the top, not from the general public who think they elected them. But it says here that the GCF headquarters in South Korea to be opened this week. So what's that? You see, that was back, that was 2013. And it says here that in Sejong, it says December 3rd, the headquarters of the United Nations Green Climate Fund, so GCF is Green Climate Fund, will be officially opened this week in a ceremony here about a year after South Korea was named to host the world's largest fund on climate change, the government said Tuesday. And it goes on about the opening ceremony and who's all attending it. Other attendees will include Christine Lagarde, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, because they're going to have all the money flowing through them, and through the private bank of the Rothschilds in Switzerland, by the way, because all these big old families are all involved in the whole future agenda of the whole planet, every facet of it, and making lots of money off it, because that's what they've always done for generations, make money off the herds. And Christina Figueres is Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and South Korea's Finance Minister Hyung Oh-seok, it says. It says the GCF, launched in late 2010, is the largest UN organization to be based in South Korea, and is expected to raise $100 billion per year starting from 2020. Its main purpose is to channel the fund from industrialized nations, and these are all taxes, by the way, to developing countries, which is not going to developing countries at all, to help them tackle global warming and other problems related to climate change. So here you go. All your global warming and yada yada yada, it's not called climate change, it's you're going to deep freeze. But it's all your fault, you see, because you breathe. You breathe, and you can't have all the people breathing for free, you know. There's a lot of money to be made off hot air. It comes out your mouth and nose. For those who are good at conning you. And by God, they are good at conning you. They've done it for centuries and centuries. They really have. And as they change the whole of society under control, and to get new laws for controlling the general public and make money off them too, this is the greatest tax that the whole world, this is a world tax, you understand. But it's a private kind of tax because it goes through the private organizations, the big private banks at the top that are authorized for the carbon money to go through. Billions and billions a week go through, you see. And bankers are awfully good, like the Rothschilds, for instance. They've made their money off cons their whole life long, their whole generations long, and many of their own ilk too. And they're still at it today, and they helped, of course, set up the Bank for International Settlements. They run it. The IMF, they run it too. All your top central banks as well, and also the United Nations, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, etc., and the Fabian Society. The same families are involved in the creation of all these organizations. They're all really one big organization, different specialized branches working on their own part of the agenda, the same agenda. Now, here's an article here. It says cap and trade. Again, another term to throw the public. What do you mean cap and trade? You're selling hats or something? No. The idea, supposedly, is that each country agrees every year to a new level, which is the cap of carbon emissions and so on, and trade. Now, the big corporations can buy the carbon, basically carbon credits from each other. A lot of nothings is they buy from each other, you see. This is the greatest con in history, this. Paper changes hands. They represent supposedly like invisible bags of non-invisible bags, but non-invisible bags of carbon, you see. What a scam, isn't it? I mean, we've got to make up a new fairy tale about this. It's much better than The King Has No Clothes. And it says, the so-called cap and trade may be a solution to a problem that was not intended to solve state budget crisis. Now we're getting to a little bit the truth here. That's a part of it, you see. Cap and trade policy was designed to address climate change by putting a cap on carbon dioxide emissions, issuing a fixed number of permits, that's permits, allowing them to trade, and then allowing firms to trade these permits. Since they pay a market price per ton of CO2 emissions, firms have an incentive to find all the cheapest possible ways to cut emissions. But the suggestion to implement cap and trade in any one state within the US has almost nothing to do with global warming. Given huge emissions from the rest of the world, cutting emissions in one state will have no perceptible effect on global emissions and climate change. So for policy options within your own state, it's about the money. It says in June, President Barack Obama announced a proposal to impose a greenhouse gas emission restrictions on electricity generators and a tax in each state that will achieve an average reduction of 30% below 2005 levels. Now, what do you mean it's going to reduce your consumption because you can't afford it or something? Think about this. This is to go on all fuels, folks, for travel, but for primary things like heating. So guess what? One day you'll see in the news, just like Britain has right now, X many thousands of people die in their own homes every winter, and it's now normal. You accept it, and it goes up every year. It won't matter to the rest of them who are managing just to get along and scrape by and have lots of entertainment and sex and everything else and watching their porn and whatever else they do in their spare time. But since the federal plan allows a lot of flexibility as each state can choose how to comply, each can impose energy efficiency mandates, switch production from coal to low-carbon natural gas, reduce demand for electricity, increase renewable production, or use any combination of such methods. One allowable method is for a state to impose its own cap and trade system or join a regional cap and trade system. So they go local, regional, national, international, etc. So you can have big international corporations lowering their taxes and so on by trading their own carbon credits at the top from one branch of the same company to the other big branch of the same company across the water. So the Clean Air Act has been signed. So it has been signed, you see, and it's time to comply by Joshua Roberts Routers. It says historically such permits are handed out to existing electricity generators so that each plant can emit 70% of a previous year's level. Remember, carbon dioxide is an invisible minute gas, one of the most minutest gases there is. And it's got to exist or there'll be nothing but grow. Since the plants suck it up, they need it. Plants need it, and crops need it. It's a beautiful fairy tale, though. Is it or sell those rights or buy more? Or unfortunately, the Californian plan started by handing out these valuable pieces of paper to existing polluters. After all, the price of electricity is going to increase in any case, which will cover those firms' added cost of compliance, it says. Then it goes on and say, if they get free permits, because that's what the governments are all doing, they hand them out free, billions of dollars worth of free ones to all the big corporations. It says these firms make profits because they trade them. It costs them nothing to get them. You pay for all, you see, the taxpayer. A simple alternative is for the state not to hand out the permits but to sell them at auctions. Then the state can capture those profits as state revenue. It says, take my own state, Illinois, as a mere example of the budget pressures faced by virtually every state. Illinois has huge budget deficits. Well, everyone does, because they all overspend anyway and fill their pockets with, illicit gains. It says the Institute of Government and Public Affairs at the University of Illinois estimates the state's annual budget deficit will be $4 billion next year and will rise within 10 years to about $14 billion per year. Amazing, eh? $14 billion a year. Eh? Deficit. You talk about crooks, eh? The whole world's run by crooks for every level. Cap and trade could be a partial remedy. They said that about value-added tax and GST in Canada, etc. That none of the money ever goes to pay off anything. If Illinois sells permits for carbon dioxide emissions at about $20 per tonne, similar to the program already in place in California, the state could raise $1.5 billion per year. They always try and sell it to you, these con men, don't they? Try to sell it to you. That number is over a third of the $4.1 billion deficit projected for the next year. So in other words, these taxes, energy taxes, carbon taxes, are really all to help us get out the hole that all the crooks get us in. It's not meant to get us out the hole, it's to get more money for the crooks, folks. It's the same crooks, for goodness sake. But it's also to manage your whole lives. For everything you purchase will have a carbon tax on it, even the paper wrapper on a bar of chocolate, including the chocolate too. Yep. What a slave you are, eh? Great little producer you are too. Great little producer. But nobody complains. They don't mind. Oh well, oh well. And here's another article too on November 26, High Country News. It says, America's duck factory is in trouble. No kidding. It's another big con. I love this con here. More than half of North America's waterfowl hatch in the prairie potholes region, named for the extensive wetlands formed in depressions glaciers left behind as they receded from what are now the Dakotas, Montana, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Canada. But farmers are draining the potholes. Well, that was done centuries ago, folks. They're not still doing it. In fact, there's fewer farmers now than ever. And tilling what little native prairie remains to plant more corn and soybeans. No, the big corporations, the corporate farms are doing all that stuff with their GMO stuff. That's not just bad news for ducks, it's bad news for the climate, because breaking up grassland soils releases carbon dioxide. Well, everything apparently does, doesn't it? Eh? In response, a waterfowl conservation group figured out a new way to help ranchers save their grasses, paying them to grow carbon instead of corn. Ducks Unlimited and their partners have been working for years on a new kind of carbon credit created by calculating the greenhouse gases stored in grasslands that would otherwise be tilled in a single year. Now, this is a big so-called charitable organization, multi-billion charitable organization. They started back in the 80s, I think it was. And initially they targeted the hunters, I think it was all to conserve ducks and so on, yada, yada, yada. But no, this is a big, they didn't have investments, this big, charitable organization. And folk who want to evade taxes or avoid taxes, or whatever they call it, can simply donate money to them, and it's taking off their tax deductions. That's how powerful it is. And you see the big names that run it too. And that's only one of the many things that help run all this system. I talk about gangsters now. This article here from the New York Times says, on Chicago, it says, the nation's first experiment in carbon emissions cap and trade has come to an end. And now, this is back in 2011 it was. It says, but its mark on the climate change industry will be felt for some time to come. That's where they first started. Al Gore set up one there first of all to rake in the profits after the government handed out all the millions of dollars for free ones for the big companies to trade each other. It's gambling, isn't it? Let's trade these. It's like trading baseball cards or something. The second, they can't lose on these kind of baseball cards because the taxpayer is going to pick up any slack, you see, if they can't make a big profit on it. The second commitment period for member countries of the Chicago Climate Exchange ended December 31st, 2011. And it's no new cycle to ring in the new year. Exchange trading and allowances system generated known as carbon financial instruments, CFIs, to meet emission reduction commitment ends as well, although CFI generation will continue as a strictly voluntary greenhouse gas emissions offset system. But what happened to it? You see, well, I went into this organization, and it says ICE, I-C-E. I love these terms, eh? ICE. I guess if you can't pay your carbon credits and taxes, they'll ice you, They'll put you in ice. There's plenty of it because we're in massive global cooling. And because I've been spraying like crazy with the chemtrails for years now. But it says Intercontinental Exchange Inc. told traders Friday that it would shut down its U.S. emissions derivatives platform a year after acquiring its parent, only to suffer sparse trading as the prospects of a federal carbon reduction plan remain dim. Well, they've passed it now. And this was back in 2011 too. The money-losing Chicago Climate Futures Exchange venture will continue operating through the first quarter of 2012 before closing. Exchange officials said in a notice, ICE, it says, will then take over ICE as an international one. You see, the big one. So they do it step by step. Get the folk kind of used to it, deal with it, and then jump up internationally, you see. This article here, Green Climate Fund, who's pledged and who hasn't, from ABC News, December 6, 2014. Among the most significant achievements of the UN climate talks, the Green Climate Fund is intended to become a key channel of money to help poor countries take action to fight climate change and deal with its impacts, as they forbid them, by the way, to have electricity because it will produce CO2 and they'll start destroying their wonderful wildlife in these poor countries, you see. With Norway's pledge of $258 million on Friday, the fund has received promises of $10 billion and is expected to start considering projects for funding next year. However, the 24-member board is split equally between developing and developed countries. First needs to adopt some rules on what kinds of projects should get financing. Here's a look at some of its contributions from rich and poor alike. The US, $3 billion. White House says a significant portion should support private sector activities and reserves the right to direct some of the money to other funds based on the pace of progress of the GCF. So in other words, private sector activities, that's the big corporations that still have a base in the US. For cheap labour, set up a factory, you'll fund it all, and then get the cheap labour there, you see. Then other funds too, well, that's all the other CIA-based NGOs that the US government runs as well. Japan, $1.5 billion. Green groups suspect Japan wants the fund to allow financing for fossil fuel technologies, including modern coal-fired power plants. Japan delegates in Lima said Friday that Japan hasn't adopted a position yet. An EP report Monday showed Japan has already used about $1 billion in climate money to build coal plants in Indonesia. Britain, $1.2 billion. Britain says it wants to earmark some of the adaptation funds for the most vulnerable countries. Maybe they should start with their own, eh? As their own folk die in their own homes every winter. But no, it's global agenda. You understand that Von Rompuy, the United Nations, was correct in that article I read a year ago or whatever it was, when he said that the age of the nation state is dead. You're international, folks. You're run by one big group of international corporations at the top. And guess who's at the top of that? Well, listen to my archive section at cuttingthroughmetrics.com. And France put $1 billion there. The articles here, by the way, where the French are still running out the country because the country's absolutely broke and they're taxing folk that have any work at all into utter poverty. Socialism again. Eh? Sweden, $550 million. Sweden's contribution is the biggest relative to the size of the country's population. The pledge needs to be approved by Parliament, which is currently in crisis mode after the government failed to get its budget adopted. Australia, 0. Australia says it will continue to pay for climate change adaptation in vulnerable countries through its aid budget rather than through the GCF. South Korea, $100 million, the first developing country to make a pledge to the fund. It's also the host country of GCF headquarters. China, 0 pledge. The world's most populous country, number 1 carbon polluter, hasn't contributed to the fund, but China's chief negotiator at the United Nations climate talks in Lima Thursday urged all developed countries, including Australia, to do so. You see? Grasshopper, you don't understand this way of thinking. And then it's got Mongolia, $50,000. It may be a symbolic sum, but China's poor neighbour Mongolia's pledge showed that anyone can contribute, not just rich nations. Mongolia's GDP per capita is not even 1/5 of that of the United States. Getting back to China for a second, though, don't forget that China's under the same banking corp, big boot, that the rest of the world's under. If you think that they're independent, think again, folks. Go into the history of who set China up too. The same guys that set up the Soviet Union and Germany as well. Nazi Germany. I could go into it much, much deeper, but a lot of folk who really believe in their flags and things would be, they wouldn't like it. This is all new. And it goes on and on and on. I'll put this link up tonight too, as your countries all pledge you down as collateral, basically, to pay all this law off. What a great boon. I mean, literally, they've got nothing. They don't have to produce anything. Just things on paper. They don't even manufacture a product. The only products they manufacture are con games. And they have professional marketing companies to soften the wording, and reverse the wording and all that kind of stuff with all the lawyers they use. Isn't that wonderful, eh? Isn't that just wonderful? And then also put a link up to the home of the Green Climate Fund. Green, eh? As green they say on the far side of the hill. I wish this hill was, on a different planet as they collect all this cash. And I'll also put up a link you can all look at to International Petroleum Exchange. Wikipedia. The International Petroleum Exchange, now ICE. Oh, wow, ICE, you see that? Remember the Al Gore Corporation, eh? The Chicago Stock Exchange, or Futures Exchange. It was dealing initially with carbon trading. Run by ICE now, you see. International Petroleum Exchange. Now ICE Futures, it's called. It's Futures. This is based in London, was one of the world's largest energy futures and option exchanges. Its flagship, commonly Brent crude, was a world benchmark for oil prices, but the exchange also handled futures contracts and options on fuel oil, natural gas, electricity, baseload and peak load, coal contracts, and as of 22nd April 2005, carbon emission allowances with the European Climate Exchange, ECX. IPE was acquired by Intercontinental Exchange 2001. IPA was an open outcry exchange until 7th April 2005 when its name was changed to ICE Futures and all trading was shifted onto an electronic trading platform. We'll show you some of the history of it too. Con after con after con after con. And have brainwashed a whole population with the school kids that have not grown up into, carbon's bad. We're polluting the atmosphere. And here they are. If you think they're trillionaires now at the top, give them a few years of this and they will be way beyond all of that, folks. These same families that dream all this stuff up with all the think tanks that do all the work beneath them on their behalf that you pay for. And Leona Aglukak, I guess, says Canada is still finalising targets as climate talks begin. December 4, 2014. It's on right now, you see. And so the Environment Minister says any new international climate deal must be fair to Canada. Nearly 200 countries are meeting in Lima, Peru to work on agreement ahead of next year's final talks in Paris. Ain't your politicians or ain't? No, they don't. Parliamentary governments are way below. They're about the third or fourth level down here on this big pyramid. And they all know it too, by the way. They all know what their jobs are. And it says, any new international climate deal must be fair to Canada. 200 councils are meeting. And in the lead up to conference, countries have been announcing new, deeper cuts to greenhouse gas emissions. Two of the world's biggest emitters, China and the United States, recently signed a deal that will see the US cut its emissions by 28% below 2005 levels by 2025. Now, if you cut emissions, folks, you're talking about your heating, all kinds of heating. You're talking about your gasoline, diesel, that's for freight and everything. Everything's going to go up in price because the trains use their diesel and so on, etc. Everything. It says Canada has so far matched the US emissions targets, but Aglokak would not say whether Canada would match the US goal this time. If it makes sense for Canada, we'll go there, but in terms of targets, we have not finalised those as we move towards 2015. So, as I say, this goes ahead, regardless of politicians. They don't mention this stuff to the public. It's another thing. Nothing that really matters is mentioned during election time. And education, jobs, and welfare, and pensions. That's what you hear every time they go for elections, eh? But all these big international agreements that will run your life from birth to death, and all the UN agreements and rights to the child and euthanasia, never touched, folks. And these massive taxes like carbon tax, never touched. And Lima climate talks, they call it a stepping stone for universal treaty, meaning taxes run by this private corporations of the United Nations. This is a front again for the big top banking boys. Very old families, these. Very old families. And remember this one too, in October, right at the time, California readies pay-as-you-drive tax test coming soon to a road near you. This is to be across the world, folks. Everything you do is going to be taxed. To save the world, It's all going to be saved by lots of money going into these big private organizations at the top that they can trade amongst themselves to make multi-quadrillions. Yeah. And it says, it won't happen immediately or even within the next year, but not too far in the future, you may pay tax for every mile you drive, thanks to California. They always kick it off in California. And it gives you the story, and I'll put that up tonight as well, for those who really care. Because most folk, you can tell them it's coming to you tomorrow, next week, and they think, no, that's must be 100 years away. That's how they are, Their little bubble can't be scratched, or might burst. It says the move makes California the largest state to explore how modern technology might replace dwindling money from gasoline taxes. Who's kidding who? It used to build and maintain roads. Who's kidding who? You think it goes to the roads? What does go to is what they claim it's going to go for. What does, in this corrupt system? It has to build and maintain roads thanks to ever more efficient vehicles and less driving overall. Oh, that's the reason for it, less driving overall. So they make the shortfall from somewhere else just by slapping their tax. Congress has been forced to fill the gap at the federal level with billions of dollars in temporary funding. In California, where residents pay 48.5 cents in the gallon in state gasoline taxes worth more than $3 billion a year, the state has borrowed from those revenues in recent years to cover shortfalls elsewhere. Of the other states in which have explored such systems, Oregon stands as the most advanced with its plan to offer a voluntary pay-as-you-drive tax set up next year, offering 5,000 drivers a chance to pay 1.5 cents for every mile they travel in the state. So that's how they brought in the driving license, and even the driving insurance. It was all voluntary. So many schmucks would go for it. Then they normalise it once enough's doing it, and away you go. And it says they give them a chance to pay 1.5 cents for every mile. That's how they started, 1.5 cents. Eventually $1.50 for every mile they travel in the state. The Oregon system uses a pair of devices, one in the vehicle and one in special fuel pumps that use GPS to track miles driven, then gave the appropriate credit or surcharge at the pump itself. Oregon also found that drivers in a test program paid 28% more than they would have using fuel taxes alone. They'll be happy and smuggy. But the backers of Oregon's mileage tax system say the technology could be far less complicated and adoption far quicker thanks to services like Apple's iPay and an in-car internet setup such as General Motors OnStar. State Farm already has a pay-as-you-drive discount for its customers with newer Ford vehicles that use Ford Sync to automatically keep track of how far they've travelled. And as the Oregon officials imagine it, one envisions a time when all new cars will come equipped with mileage reporting capability. New car buyers will decide during the registration process whether to activate the mileage reporting capability already installed in the car or add an external reporting device. It's your choice. You don't get to opt out. But you can just decide this when it's installed or add your own one, that's from a different company. They'll also choose a provider for account management or default to government-managed account. Oh, there's a government running everything, eh? Motorists will then drive and periodically receive a bill by mail or email. They'll give these fake choices, eh? You'll receive a bill by mail or email. So you've got choices in this. You're going to get the bill regardless. That may be bundled with other value-added services. Oh, it's a value-added service getting taxed for. I understand now. Motorists may check the bill details and pay online or by mail or authorize automatic payments from their smartphone. There you go. Another wee choice you get. Tablet device or the connected vehicle console on the dashboard of their car, giving motorists the ability to choose their mileage reporting and bill payment preferences will make mileage reporting and per mile change payment simple and comfortable as each motorist defines it. The only choice you can't make is whether to pay it or not. Beautiful, isn't it? Standard marketing technique psychology. Eh? Works every time. And it says movements may be a more personal form of data than even name and address. Where you live is a public record, but tracking someone's daily routine can reveal far more private information. There are already many ways businesses can do so. Every iPhone running the latest update has the ability to send location data to advertisers or remember users' frequent locations, and license plate scanning firms already have 1 billion plates on records. In other words, they already know where you're going, folks, so why are you worried about it? Goodness sake. Eh? Government always kills many birds with one stone, They get you to pay for all of it, as long as you can track and trace you and fleece you. And Ontario's ICE cap and trade system, level. But progressive PCs says it's carbon tax regardless. Ontario has not ruled out joining the Quebec-California cap and trade system to limit emissions of greenhouse gases. We're just beginning our conversations, our discussions, our partnership with industries, environment and climate change, Minister Glenn Murray said Thursday. What we're most concerned about, if we get to 4 degrees centigrade mean temperature change in the next several decades, that's a legacy that's pretty unthinkable for our children. I wonder if 4 degrees centigrade, well, I'll tell you, during the summer, somebody would be happy to get 4 degrees centigrade. It's that darn cold. There's no summer at all here now in Ontario. And that's nothing to do with that. That's to do with them spraying, of course, and tampering with the climate. Quebec has links with California and a cap-and-trade system that sets a limit on carbon emissions, allowing companies to pollute less to sell their emissions room to others. Overall, the goal is to make polluting more expensive and encourage the use of greener technology, supporters say. I guess you'll end up having to walk everywhere, and you'll use those made from reeds and rushes sandals. You'll be walking on green technology. Eh? And even then they'll tax you for it. You're not going to win, folks. And the USDA, Department of Agriculture, announces carbon credit sale. Agency initiates partnership with Chevrolet to purchase nearly 40,000 carbon dioxide credits. Isn't that wonderful? Partnerships with big corporations and the other big corporation, your government. Isn't that wonderful, though, eh? So it's win-win-win because they have to produce nothing. There's no costs here of production to get all these money from carbon credits and the big casino in this, another big casino for the big banking boys. Yeah. Isn't that wonderful? To save the planet, And you all fall for it. You've all been brainwashed, you fall for it too. Because no one looks up. Since 98, they've been crisscrossing your skies. No, it's not jet planes from going to airports, folks. I've lived in country areas here where there's very few planes at all, and I've seen total grids set up in a matter of an hour or two. And then the weather really changes big time each time it happens. And they've been doing it for years. 98 was when they started doing it seriously, like continuously. That's the real world we live in. But what a great future this is for the big boys, eh? And everyone gets in, all the agencies get in the act as well. For your health, you know. To make sure you're breathing cleaner air as you freeze to death in the winter. Yep. Isn't that wonderful? Oh, and every prostitute agency is going to make a fortune off this, hiring more employees and up in their wages and all that, to make sure you're safe. No one ever stops and says, well, did any citizen elect the United Nations in to govern us all on all these different charters and rights and all the rest of it, and euthanasia laws, blah, blah, which are rights, of course? No. Nope. Did any national government ask its people permission to join it and sign all this? No. You see, you were taken over long, long ago, folks. Long ago. And I've gone through the history of the big organizations that run the world. You've got to start using the archive section at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Thousands and thousands of hours of talks. There's this host that come on every day. Still use daily my stuff. They go over it and over it and over it. It's so rich and stuff. And then they grab it as their own. It's quite amazing for at least one of them or two. But that's the real world we live in, isn't it? Where everything's managed, even information on all sides. Isn't it managed? And the more people go into all this trying to see, it's a natural thing to try and join a side. Human nature. And they give you all the sides to join, like fake choices. It's the same thing. Fake sides to join. Everything's managed. Every single thing's managed. I keep saying you've got to start thinking for yourselves. There's nothing else you can do. Think for yourselves. That's your birthright, for goodness sake. Without that, you'd be a zombie, your own mind. Don't be scared to sit and think for yourself without having something flashing lights in your hands as you're pressing little buttons and things. Silence. Learn to be comfortable in your own presence. Today, folk panic in their own presence and there's nothing else around them. They panic if they lose their cell phone. I mean, literally panic. They're constantly... I saw another study the other day, because why don't they keep doing these studies? It's to make sure that all these induced neuroses are actually working on folk. That's why, folks. Until folk can stop and say, gee, I've got a spare 5 minutes here, I wonder what I'll think about. See, you've been trained not to think for yourselves. And they say that the ultimate thing in all this creation is the human mind itself. It can go further in thoughts and means of thoughts with vocabulary and all the rest of it than all other creatures. And yet, you let professional people that give you all your movies and all your chat rooms, you let them give you every thought that's out there, rather than use your own mind and do it yourself and come to your own opinions and your own conclusions. And that's scary, that, you know. Scary. Very, very scary. I was lucky when I was young because the country was all around. And if you wanted to just go 5 minutes, you'd start walking in the outskirts of the little town, and you're in the country, and you could walk all day if you wanted to, pass the whole time of day and watching what was there, and you'd pass little areas of water where there were swans, things like that, and little burns, we call them, small rivers, streams, and you'd see fish in them, and you'd stand and watch the sun glistening off the fish and things like that. In those days, sun was a good thing. Today, apparently, it's bad for you. But back then, when you had a bit of sun, everything was happy. You know, you had that lovely fluorescent green colour off the leaves, and everything sort of shone, including the glistening water as you watch the stream. And that's how your mind starts to work, is observing all this. And a natural meditation comes out of walking and seeing all this too. You're deep in thought, you see. Natural meditation. And that's how your mind starts to really start to work. You're observing things, thinking about what you're observing, and making opinions and coming to conclusions for yourself. That's been robbed intentionally by very clever people who've studied you for an awful long time. And even in the educational systems, it didn't give people education and mandate education to help them think for themselves. It was to stunt their ability to think for themselves and to make them more efficient when they shut them all into the factories and got them off the land and stole the land from them. And they worked in the factories till they dropped and died at a very early age for the big corporations that owned the factories. But you had to be able to read basic instructions for machinery and things like that, and notes that were handed from foremen, and that's why they gave basic education. They had big meetings in Britain and other countries about the effects of giving education to the general public to make them more efficient, and they were really worried about them being able to start communicating and maybe starting to write, and some of them might even start to write good books down the road. So they said, we're going to keep them awfully busy, 16-hour days in the factories by law. And keep them at a rate of malnourishment where they wouldn't live beyond 30, 35, maybe 40 if they're lucky or unlucky. And again, too, at a sustenance rate for income, so that any family would be malnourished. Malnourished children and were common in Britain right up into actually World War II. And that's coming back again, by the way, where they've got rickets again. And the UN's trying to wean folk off drinking milk and taking cheese and dairy products. Rickets is back already. But the UN doesn't mention that. Malthus is alive and well, employed by the same big jokers that ran the world then, and their offsprings run it today. That's the truth of the matter. And they churned out the penny novels too, with little exciting adventure stories, little simplistic things. Linguistic minimalism involved all through it, so anybody could read it with little simple sentences of spies or fighting for your country against the terrible whoever it happened to be at the time. To occupy your time. And then when radio come along, boy, they went to town with ads. The BBC was created by the government as a propaganda tool, and by God, they used it to full extent. Along came television, and bingo, you had the minds of the public. They didn't have to worry about them reading anymore. They weren't going to read anything non-fictional and important, not now. And then through the fiction, you could program them with all the stuff you wanted them to start to believe in. And it's a perfect art today. Perfect art. And embed all your updates like a computer on pollution and carbon taxes and killing off the planet with your nasty behavior. It's all your fault. They embed all that into all these movies and sitcoms. Everything, it's through everything. And the writers are paid to put this stuff in. And the educational system, by the way, their name for education is indoctrination. Simple, indoctrination. Yeah. They indoctrinate each year, they up the indoctrination to each intake further along, so that they're already prepared when the next big push for the great change down in their lifetime is to come as well. They'll accept it without question. We're easily programmed. Terribly easily programmed, aren't we? Wonderful too, with the Orwellian speak and double speak and so on, of the terms that they use. They can literally sell you anything. They can cover everything, as I say, in roses, as they tell you to bite the cyanide pill. Yep. That's the professional techniques used by neurolinguistics, psycholinguistics, and the neurologists are working on it, neuroscientists, and the behaviorists, all working with the big marketing corporations to make you believe whatever they want you to believe, until they can make your own elimination a happy, desirable thing, oh, wonderful, etc. I don't know if you ever saw Soylent Green, which was actually put out there by the big boys to try and get the message out on, oh, there's too many of you folks, that would be post-industrial and useless. And its real title at the time was Make Room. Make Room. And in the movie version, they called it Soylent Green, where they start feeding the people to each other in little, very hygienic, little kind of chocolate-sized pieces, etc. Although the elite can still get beef and all the rest of it, even in the movie. But the whole thing was to make you think, oh, well, to get the idea going through fiction, there's too many of you. Yep. And one point in Charlton Heston's roommate, he's an older fella, decides, well, it's time for him to go into euthanasia. He'd lived long enough, and, well, just like this rights to the child thing and the rights for the elderly and everybody else, well, I'm just kind of fed up, I'll go and get euthanized. And they give you a great scene of how it will be, you see, where you tried folk at Nuremberg for this. Lots of folk in the Soviet Union should have been tried for that, and a lot worse, actually, because they had a lot longer to kill a lot of people off, more folk off. Didn't happen. But you walk through this big place with all these swing doors, and everything's spotless clean and so on, and shiny, and like receptionists at airports all happy and smiling to see you, and they guide you into a little chamber, and it's actually a room, and you hear for the first time things that they showed them 3D imaging on the walls and all that, green fields and antelopes going and deer and all the rest of it, and beautiful music going as this thing slowly released the poison into his system. A wonderful way to die, you see. They can dress up the most horrific acts, and they do, with beautiful techniques and terminology involved, and make you happy to be making room for someone else, preferably one of the elites. From Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night, and may your God or your gods go with you.